I was 14 when my stepmother looked straight into my eyes, then turned to my father and said in a voice so calm it was terrifying, "There is something wrong with him. He needs to be checked before it's too late." It didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like a sentence already signed. Outside the window, the rain of Seattle fell steadily on the porch roof. The yellow kitchen light reflected on the wooden table where the three of us sat in a triangle in which I always felt I was the weakest side. The clock on the wall ticked, slow and precise, as if time itself had chosen her side. I was used to the way Melissa talked about me when my father was present. Gentle, worried, sacrificial. She placed a hand on her chest as if her heart were breaking over a child too complicated to save. If there were an Oscar for devoted motherhood, she would have needed an entire room to display them. When it was just the two of us, she didn't need to perform. "I didn't do anything," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I didn't do anything wrong." My father sighed. He had developed that sigh after marrying Melissa, the exhausted sound of a man who wanted a quiet life. He looked at me as if searching for the most convenient answer, the least troublesome one. "Melissa says you talk to yourself," he said. "I was reading." "He looks at me," Melissa cut in, her eyes shining with tears. "Like he hates me. Like he wants me gone." I almost laughed. If I truly had that power, my life would have been much easier. But I didn't laugh. I saw my father's hand tighten. He loved peace more than truth. And Melissa knew it. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The air thickened as if someone had pulled the oxygen out of the room. I realized I was being written into a story where the villain had already been cast. "I don't hate anyone," I said. "I just..." "See?" Melissa turned to my father. "He always denies it. Doctors say children like that rarely understand their condition." Which doctors? When? I had never met anyone. But I saw the effect of the word. It carried the authority of an invisible expert, a witness I could never cross-examine. My father rubbed his temple. "Maybe it's just an evaluation. If nothing's wrong, you'll come home." If. The tiny word dropped between us like a hole. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who once carried me on his shoulders at ball games, and wondered when I had become a risk to manage instead of a son to protect. "Why does no one ask what I think?" I asked. No one answered. Melissa reached for her phone. I heard each button press, one by one, like nails being hammered into a coffin. I wanted to grab it, to scream, to do something big enough to break this script. But if I did, I would become exactly what she said I was. So I stayed still. I observed. I memorized. Melissa spoke with perfectly trembling fear, describing me as a boy growing more unpredictable. My father added a few lines here and there, not because he was certain, but because he was afraid of being uncertain. I understood. Fear always wins. When she hung up, the house became so quiet I could hear the rain shift direction with the wind. Melissa didn't look at me anymore. She looked at my father, waiting for confirmation. He nodded. That was it. My life was decided with a nod. "Just tonight," he told me. "They only want to evaluate." Only. I wondered how many terrible things in the world began with that word. I went upstairs, closed my door, and sat on my bed. I tried to imagine tomorrow at school, friends, a math test, normal things. I held on to that thought like a drowning person clinging to wood. They can't lock up an innocent person, right? Truth has to matter. I lay down, still wearing my clothes, staring at the familiar ceiling. I knew every crack in it. I promised myself I would come back. I believed myself. And that was my first mistake. I thought they would come in the morning. I thought there would be time to explain, for someone calmer, clearer, to ask what was really happening. I thought the night was a pause between accusation and sentence. But I underestimated how fast adults can remove a child from the picture. The knock came while it was still dark, not a polite knock. The sound of people who were certain the door would open. I sat up. For a second, I forgot everything, like waking from a nightmare before remembering it was real. Then, I heard movement downstairs. Melissa's voice, small and shaking, but not surprised. She'd been waiting for them. I opened my bedroom door. The hallway was cold. All the lights were on. My father stood near the stairs, hands clasped, his back bent as if apologizing to some god. There were 3 strangers in my house. One wore a jacket with the county badge, a woman held a clipboard, and a tall man stood near the door, his body making it clear that if I ran, he wouldn't. "Jackson?" the woman asked, her voice soft as cotton. I nodded. "We just want to take you somewhere to talk for a little while." "Just?" The word returned like a curse. "I can talk here," I said. "I didn't do anything." The man didn't speak, but he shifted slightly, blocking an invisible exit I had just realized I was looking for. Melissa stepped forward, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. The touch made my skin crawl. "Mom just wants you to get help," she whispered, quiet enough to sound like love, loud enough for everyone else to hear it as evidence. My father didn't look at me. He looked at them, as if they were an instruction manual for a situation too complicated. "How long will I be gone?" I asked. No one answered that question. They answered easier ones. "Do you have personal belongings? Can I bring my phone?" "We'll see." I understood. I was dissolving out of decision. I put on my shoes, my hands shaking, but strangely, my mind was clear. I remember thinking, don't cry. Whatever happens, don't give them what they want to see. When we stepped outside, the rain of Seattle kept falling. The neighbors might have been asleep, or they might have been watching through curtains. Either way, I knew the story from now on would no longer be mine to tell. The vehicle waited, door open. Not a police car. That somehow made it worse. I turned back to my father. This was the moment he should stop everything. This was when he should say wait. He only said, "Cooperate, son." I got in. Cold seat. Plastic and disinfectant. The woman beside me began asking questions designed to sound neutral. "Do you often feel angry? Do you ever think about hurting someone?" If I said no, I was denying. If I said yes, I was dangerous. I chose the shortest answers possible. I watched her pen move, fast and certain, as if my life were something already measured. The city passed the window. Bridges, signs, streets I once thought belonged to me. I wondered how long before they belonged to someone else. When the building appeared, I realized the worst thing about it was not that it looked frightening. It looked legitimate. Clean, organized, reasonable. They opened the door. The tall man moved closer, not touching me, but close enough to remind me he could. Inside, everything happened so fast I couldn't keep ownership of anything. Shoelaces, jacket, phone, my name. A plastic band was fastened around my wrist with a number. "Just procedure," someone said. I began to hate that word. I looked back, half expecting to see my father running in, breathless, saying there had been a mistake. There was no one. The door behind me shut. Metal. Final. I realized I had just heard the future. The first thing I learned was this. Truth has no weight here. I thought if I simply spoke clearly, logically, people would understand. I thought adults who worked in clean buildings with shining nameplates must care about right and wrong. I carried that belief with me through the metal door. It died very quickly. They led me down a long hallway of Seattle Children's Hospital, where everything was excessively white, as if color itself were considered dangerous. There were doors opening with keycards, automatic locks, footsteps that were never in a hurry. The people here moved with the calm of those who knew you weren't going anywhere. My room had a bed bolted to the floor, a plastic desk, and a window that opened only a few inches. I remember staring out and trying to measure the distance to the ground, as if my brain was still searching for a physical escape from something that wasn't physical. A nurse read the rules. No laces, no sharps, no closed doors, no privacy. Her voice wasn't cruel, and that frightened me more. It was the kindness of a system that did not need your agreement. "Do you understand?" she asked. If I said no, I was difficult. If I said yes, I agreed. "I understand," I said. The evaluation began almost immediately. Another room, soft chairs, gentle light. Everything designed to make you forget the door was still locked. Dr. Whitman sat across from me, legs crossed, pen ready. He smiled the kind of smile taught in medical school. Professional, detached. "Jackson, do you know why you're here?" "Because my stepmother wants me to be," I thought. "No," I said. He nodded, wrote something. Do you feel angry at your family? I don't. The pen moved again. I just want to go home. That's a normal reaction, he said, as if he had given me a gift. I tried to explain about Melissa, about the way she changed when my father turned away. I told him about evenings, whispers, the way everything bent back into being my fault. Dr. Whitman listened, nodded, sometimes very attentive. Hope flickered. Then I saw him write, fixation on stepmother. I'm not obsessed, I said quickly. He gave me a gentle smile. It's okay. It's okay. 2 words, meaning, you have been decided. The days that followed began to blur. Medication in the morning, group therapy, observation, someone always watching, someone always writing. I tried different approaches. I was polite. Then they called it manipulation. I was sad, then they called it depression. I was quiet. Then they called it withdrawal. I was angry, then they called it loss of control. Every road led to the same place. Stay. There was a nurse, Elena, who sometimes lingered longer than the others. She looked at me as if trying to solve a math problem whose answer didn't match the question. Once, while handing me medication, she asked softly, "Do you feel heard?" The question caught in my throat. "No," I whispered. She nodded very slightly, as if that didn't surprise her. But she still handed me the cup. She still followed procedure. Here. Compassion was not strong enough to change outcomes. I began to realize the truly dangerous thing. No one thought they were hurting me. They thought they were protecting everyone from me. And when you are cast as the threat, every act of defense becomes evidence. One afternoon, they let me see part of the report. Patient continues to deny responsibility, tendency to blame caregiver. I stared at the sentence, feeling like I was reading about a stranger who had stolen my name. "What do I have to do to go home?" I asked. The staff member didn't look up. "Progress." "What is progress?" She hesitated, then said, "Accept help." I understood. Truth would not get me out. Only compliance would. That night, lying on the bed bolted to the floor, I stared at the new ceiling. Smooth, no cracks, nothing to memorize. I wondered how many children before me had lain there and reached the same conclusion. If I kept being myself, I would never leave. And for the first time, I considered abandoning the truth. I don't remember the exact moment I changed. There was no lightning, no dramatic decision. Just one morning I woke up and understood that if I kept trying to prove I was right, I would stay here forever. Truth was not the key. They were the ones holding it. So I began to observe them the way they observed me. I noticed what made them nod. I memorized the answers praised as honest, the expressions labeled stable, the silences considered self-control. I started learning the language of freedom. In group therapy, I slowed down my speech. I repeated phrases they liked to hear. I'm learning to understand my feelings. I know everyone just wants to help. I feel safe here. Each sentence felt like swallowing a stone, but they wrote it down. And when they wrote, the door shifted a little. Dr. Whitman started smiling at me longer. He sat straighter in his chair. He asked what I thought about my progress. "I think I'm becoming more responsible," I said. It was a perfect lie. Empty of content, full of meaning to them. His pen moved quickly. I saw a new word appear. Cooperative. I almost wanted to thank him. I changed my body too. Shoulders relaxed. Eye contact just enough. Not too long. That was defiance. Not too little. That was avoidance. I smiled when appropriate, nodded when needed. Sometimes I even corrected myself. Before, I thought everyone was wrong, I said in one meeting. Now I think maybe I need to reconsider how I see things. That nearly melted them. I looked around and wondered if anyone realized I had just built a replica of them out of flesh and bone. Elena was the first to see it. One evening, while giving me medication, she lingered longer than usual. "You're doing very well," she said. I nodded. "But?" I asked. She tilted her head, studying me, the way she had the first time we met. "But you're not here," she said. I didn't know if I should be afraid of that. "I'm just trying to go home," I replied. She watched me for another second, then wrote on the board, "Compliant." Even when someone sees you, the system still wins. I got out of that place the way they wanted, smiling at the right time, saying the right things, nodding when taught to be grateful. When the door opened, they called it a successive treatment. They shook hands, added another line into the system, and moved on to the next child. No one asked what I had left behind. I returned home for a few months before I was old enough to leave. Melissa behaved like a gracious winner. She cooked, asked if I slept well, even placed her hand on my shoulder in front of my father, as if we had survived a storm together. I learned to smile at her the way I'd learned in the hospital. My father was relieved. He believed in happy endings because he needed to. Sometimes I caught him looking at me longer than usual, as if checking whether the monster had truly left. I wanted to tell him it had never existed, but I had become too good at saying what was required. The day I moved out, Melissa hugged me. I felt my body freeze, as if some part of me feared she might change her mind and make another call. She didn't. She had already won. At least she thought so. I went to college and chose psychology without hesitation. People said it was a sign of growth, turning pain into purpose. I let them believe that. The truth was much simpler. I wanted to learn the language that had once restrained me. The school years were strange. I sat in lecture halls listening to professors talk about behavioral assessment, about the credibility of guardians, about signs of paranoia. The students around me took notes diligently, fascinated. I recognized every sentence. I knew exactly what it felt like to have your words translated into something else. I knew the difference between observation and conclusion, and how quickly people jumped across that space. I wasn't the smartest student. I was the one who had lived inside the case. I graduated with high grades, strong recommendations, and a clean record. The system loved me. I was proof that it worked. No one saw the irony. I began working, step by step, moving back closer to places like before. Similar buildings, similar hallways, doors that opened with key cards, where freedom was always defined by someone else. Sometimes I met children like me. They looked at me with a mix of hope and fear. I knew they wanted me to be the first adult who believed them. I also knew belief was not always enough. The system had its own gravity. But I did what I could. I asked one more question. I requested verification. I recorded every word carefully, as if one day someone might have to live an entire life with the way I wrote. Then one evening, after a long shift, I sat alone in my office. The city of Seattle lit up outside the window, like thousands of proofs that the world kept going, whether a child disappeared or not. I thought about my past more than usual, not because I remembered, but because I realized I had never truly seen it. I had lived through it, yes. I had endured it. But I had never seen what they wrote when I wasn't in the room. I had never read the official story of me. The thought made my heart beat faster. In the system, there were procedures, forms, access rights. I knew because now I was part of it. Before, I was the subject. Now, I had a staff badge. I opened the computer. The cursor blinked in the search field, patient, as if it had been waiting for me for years. I typed my name, Jackson Cole. I paused before pressing enter. I thought about the boy lying on the bolted bed, staring at the blank ceiling, promising he would remember. I thought about all the times I had swallowed my words to survive. Maybe this was the moment. Not to scream, not for revenge, just to look directly at what had been decided for me. My finger came down. The screen began to load. The screen took longer to load than I expected. The progress bar crawled through each percentage, and during that time, I felt as if I were standing before a door that, once opened, would never let me return as the person who had walked up to it. I could stand up. I could shut the computer. I could keep living with memory instead of evidence. But memory is always disputed. Paper is not. The file opened. My name appeared at the top of the page, neat, official, without hesitation. Beside it were dates, patient codes, a list of guardians. I saw my father's name. I saw Melissa's. Nothing strange there. I inhaled and began to read. The first lines were painfully familiar. Concerning behavior. Hostile presentation. Limited insight into condition. I could hear their voices again, calm and certain. I waited to see what I had forgotten. I waited to see where I had remembered wrong. The next page summarized the intake session. I read more slowly, as if moving too fast would make me miss the point where everything collapsed. Patient admits to intense anger towards stepmother. I stopped. I did not remember saying that. I remembered saying I wanted to go home. Maybe they misunderstood, I thought. Maybe I had expressed myself badly. I kept going. Patient tends to interpret neutral actions as personal attacks. A chill ran down my back. Neutral, the whispers, the looks, the accusations spoken when my father wasn't there. Neutral. I pushed my chair back, rubbed my face. I reminded myself to be fair. I was a doctor. I knew human memory could protect itself, reshape itself. Maybe they were right. The idea hurt, but it had order. I returned to the screen. Then I saw the quotations. They used quotation marks. Sometimes I think it would be better if she disappeared. The room seemed to shrink. I read the sentence again, word by word. I had never said that. Not in that way. Not as a wish. Maybe I had thought, in a childish moment, that things would be easier if she weren't there. But thinking is not threat. And I did not remember ever saying it aloud. I scrolled further. There were more sentences. Also, in quotes. Also wearing my voice but distorted. As if someone had taken my face and pulled it sideways. I began to understand. Not everything was a complete lie. Parts of it were true. They were simply placed inside a frame that made the conclusion travel only one direction. I saw Dr. Whitman's signature. I saw the note that the Guardian was highly credible. I saw my father described as concerned, but defers to spouse's assessment. I did not see me. I was present on every page, but absent from every decision. My heart beat faster, but not from anger. From a new calm, cold and precise. If what was here was truth, I had been a threat. But if what was here was the arrangement of truth, then I had been constructed. I scrolled to the treatment recommendations. Extend observation. Increase supervision. Further evaluation before considering discharge. Each sentence was a brick. I looked at the timestamps, and then I stopped. One evaluation was recorded as completed at 3:40 p.m. I remembered that day. That session had been delayed because the doctor arrived late. We entered the room close to 4. I was sure. As sure as I was about the ceiling having no cracks. I stared at the number, waiting for it to change. It didn't. For the first time since opening the file, I did not feel myself shrinking. I felt myself growing inside it. If this time was wrong, what else was? I straightened in my chair, hands on the keyboard. I was no longer reading my story. I was beginning to audit it. I used to think the truth was something hidden. I was wrong. The truth is often right there, on paper, in plain sight. Only no one looks at it the way it needs to be seen. I zoomed in on the screen, went back to the first pages, then forward again, slower, as if I were reading the file of another patient. Not me. Not the child who trembled when his shoelaces were taken. A case. A sequence of decisions. A predictable outcome. When you remove emotion, the pattern becomes clear. I started with the signatures. Dr. Whitman's name appeared consistently, firmly, in the most decisive places. Intake. Risk assessment. Recommendation for extended observation. Every time his pen touched the page, my future shortened a little. But he wasn't the first. Before each doctor's signature, there was another section. Guardian report. Melissa. I reread her statements, this time not as an accused child but as a professional trained to identify motive. She used words very carefully. Never said I had done anything, only that she feared I might. Never claimed I threatened, only that she felt unsafe. Feelings cannot be disproven. Feelings create liability. I could almost see how the room worked. A frightened woman, an uncertain father, a denying child. If there was risk, however small, the system would choose the side least likely to sue, not the side most likely to be right. I scrolled to the internal notes, the parts never read aloud. Mother presents as consistent. Child highly verbal. Monitor for manipulation. I leaned back in my chair. Highly verbal. I remembered being proud of speaking clearly. Here, it was a warning sign. I continued. There was a line I had missed the first time. Short, almost lost between longer statements. Recommendation influenced by potential liability. I read it again. No one called me a liar. No one said I was imagining things. They were managing risk, and I was the expendable part. I moved to the schedules. I compared entry times, exit times, observation windows, and the actual durations of meetings. There were gaps, moments where I was supposed to be in two places at once. Not error, assembly. I saw a family meeting recorded as me being uncooperative. I remembered that meeting. I had cried. I had begged my father to look at me. Perhaps, in their language, begging is refusal. Something shifted in my chest. Not the familiar hurt, not anger. A clarity almost mathematical. If you know the outcome you need, you can build the road toward it. I reviewed the entire file once more. No monster, no dangerous child. Only a system designed to believe the first adult in the room. And Melissa had arrived first. I sat there for a long time, listening to the air system, listening to the city of Seattle continuing outside as if nothing had just happened. Finally, I understood the most important thing. They didn't hate me. They didn't need to. I was simply the safest choice. And in that moment, I no longer saw myself as the child. I was the witness. I used to think that if this day ever came, I would be furious. I thought I would want someone to pay in the loudest way possible. Courtrooms, tears, apologies, collapse. I believed justice needed sound to be justice. But as I sat there, in front of the glowing screen, reading my entire childhood arranged into sections and signatures, I realized the opposite. The things that change lives usually happen in silence. I no longer needed to prove I was innocent. The file had proven something else. It proved they had chosen. I opened the internal reporting window. I knew the procedure. I had instructed others to do this. When discrepancies appeared, when protocol might have been violated, when data did not align, I had never imagined filling out the form for myself. Patient name, Jackson Cole. Reporter role, attending clinician. I paused at nature of concern. There were many ways to write it. I could make it long, emotional, filled with the years that had been taken. I could talk about fear, about loneliness, about how a child learns to disappear to survive. But the system did not understand that language. The system understood structure. So I wrote, possible interpretive bias toward predetermined outcome. Temporal inconsistencies between documentation and occurrence. Decision-making influenced by liability considerations rather than clinical data. No exclamation marks, no accusation, only precision. I attached the questionable pages. I marked the timestamps. I highlighted the quotations. I did everything a serious professional would do when they believed the system needed to review itself. I did not write about Melissa. I didn't have to. Her name was already there from the beginning. I pressed submit. There was no music, no light. No one entered the room to tell me I was brave. Only an automatic confirmation email. Request received. I sat still. Years ago, I had been swallowed by a machine because no one asked one more question. Now I had asked it. There might be an investigation, there might be a reassessment. Some people might have to explain why times did not match, why a child's words had been bent until they fit, or maybe not. But from now on, that file was no longer closed, and anyone who opened it would see the trace I left. Melissa would not be handcuffed. She would not stand in court. But if one day someone asked, if one day another professional looked back, they would see that someone had objected. Someone had said, wait. And in this world, sometimes that is the longest punishment. I stood and walked to the window. The city of Seattle stretched under the lights, vast and indifferent. It did not change because of a report. But I had. I thought about the 14-year-old boy trying not to cry while adults decided who he would be. I thought about the bed bolted to the floor, The ceiling without cracks, the promise to remember. I kept it, not by preserving the pain, but by turning it into evidence. I turned off the screen. Tomorrow, I would still go to work. I would still sit across from other children. I would still balance truth and fear, humanity and procedure. But one thing had changed forever. This time, when I wrote, I knew exactly what a line could do to a life, and I would never forget.